Hey world, it's John Pinto, your roving realtor, bon vivant, video blogger, and I am here with Ted Stephanos. How are you, Ted?
I'm doing good. How you doing today, John?
I'm getting that Stephanos like syllable. Is that about right?
Yeah, you're finally getting the hang of it. That's good.
See, even Italians can be trained eventually. And Rafael Betances, how you doing, Rafael?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you again.
Excellent. Where are you today, Rafael?
I'm actually at home today. I'm not anywhere in the middle of Napa in the parking lot taking this
In
meeting.
Petaluma. Okay, very good, very good. So today we're going to talk about earthquake fault zones. So let me wax poetic for just a moment. Every now and then in Silicon Valley, I will have someone say, I want a house with a beautiful view, but I don't want it to be in a fault zone. And I explain to them that when you have one plate come into the other plate, they meet and they make a mountain. And that's why the mountain is there, because of the fault zones. But I will leave it to your expertise to enlighten us on this subject, Ted.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anytime you're going to have mountains, you're going to have faults. So that's true. And those are, I mean, you can classify faults into different categories. You have strike slip faults that slide past each other. And then you also have thrust faults that those are the mountain building faults. And so in California, we have both. And even offshore, where you have subduction zones, that's where you have two actual plates colliding and subducting under each other. That's where that's where you can have even more severe earthquakes.
So when sellers, realtors, particularly buyers, are looking at HomeGuard natural hazard disclosures and they are determining earthquake zones, should they be looking for one classification being more threatening than another classification?
Well, you're either going to be in or not in, or on the statutory form, it's a yes, no checkbox. So we don't differentiate between different types of faults aside from being active or potentially active. So they're either going to be in or not in. Now, you actually have to be pretty close to the fault to be considered in a fault zone. And a lot of real estate agents don't really understand this concept. They might think like, well, everything in the Bay Area is in a fault zone, or everything in California is in a fault zone. And really, that's not true. I mean, it's a pretty small percentage of reports that we actually do are actually in an active fault zone.
Right. You know, it's kind of like being on a train track. I mean, if you're right on the train track and the train comes, you're going to get flattened. But if you're standing right next to the train track, you may get a good breeze and some vibration, but you're not going to get flattened. Is there anything to that metaphor?
Well, you know, that's not a bad metaphor, except for the fact that you can definitely not be in a fault zone and still be flattened.
Mm-hmm. Because of soil considerations and vibrations and how the earthquake spreads out.
100% correct. And a lot of times it's more, you know, the soil that you're sitting on rather than your distance to the fault. Now, if you move, you know, hundreds of miles away from an earthquake fault, obviously the shaking is going to dissipate. But say you're in the same city as, like, for example, city of Fremont, Hayward Fault runs right through Fremont. The entire city of Fremont's going to be affected in a major earthquake on the Hayward Fault. So, but like you know, the train track metaphor, it's not necessarily how close you are to the earthquake fault that's going to make an absolute determination on what type of seismic hazards you might have. It could be more like the soil that you're sitting on, like what you mentioned earlier.
So speaking about soil, I have noticed that Hollister, which I believe does have some earthquake faults in that area, but has this soil with a high degree of talcum. Now, I am no geologist, but you know, I guess the rumor is that soil doesn't create a lot of friction, and therefore you don't have quite as much damage. Now, is that a pipe dream, or is there anything to that?
Well, what I would say to that is that in the Hollister area, the groundwater tables aren't as high. So you don't really have high liquefaction potential in most of the city of Hollister. Now, there is a pretty significant creek to the west side and southwest of Hollister. I think that's San Benito River. I'm not even sure the name, but those areas right along that creek channel, river channel, are going to be more prone to severe ground shaking and liquefaction because of the soil, the newer soil deposition, and then the higher water tables. But as far as the other aspects you're talking about, the talc or any other type of sedimentary rock, though, if as long as it's not going to be have a high water table or sandy, silty soil, it's probably not going to liquefy during an earthquake. Actually, it wouldn't if you didn't have water. You have to have water in order for liquefaction to occur.
Okay, so words to the wise, I would say in this order: buyers, because they're the ones that are assuming the risk. And then, of course, realtors want to be knowledgeable, and sellers want to understand the implications of what they're selling. So what would be your closing words to the wise on this subject?
Well, to understand the fact that not everything in California is in a fault zone, and also the fact that just because you're close to a fault, it doesn't necessarily mean you're in greater damage than being a mile away from a fault. And also another thing, I don't know if you're asking me just one thing, but I'm kind of adding a few.
Go for it.
The main, actually, what these fault maps are showing is the potential for ground rupture associated with an earthquake. So if you're in a fault zone, it has really nothing to do with ground shaking. It really just has to do with the fact that that fault can potentially rupture on your property if there's a significant earthquake. And so that's what building departments are looking at. That's what planning departments are looking at, is that fault to potentially rupture on the property, because no matter how well a structure is built, it's going to sustain damage if the fault ruptures underneath the property.
Well said. Well, thank you so much. Ted, if people would like more information, where can you direct them on your website?
Yeah, they can go to HomeGuard.com and click on the natural hazard disclosure portion of the webpage, and we have plenty of information about what's in the reports and what, terminology and things like that, and they can order reports on our website as well.
Excellent. And Rafael, if anybody wants information on roof termite home inspections or anything in general, how do they contact you?
Absolutely. You guys can either call me or you can text me at 707-616-8752. Or you can email me at rbetances@homeguard.com.
Thank you, gentlemen, for imparting all that information, and thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next page.